Welcome back to Get a Games Fan TV. How are we all getting on? How is the form? And so here we go. It's that time of the year. Hurling Team of the Year is what we're going to be discussing in this video. The Hurling Championship is officially done. It is officially wrapped up. We know that Tipperary are the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Champions. And look, what a year it was in hurling. We had shocks, we had surprises, thrills and spills, from Kildare winning the Joe Mac, from Dublin beating Limerick, from Tipperary upsetting all odds in the All-Ireland final. Absolutely incredible stuff, and still can't quite get over what we've seen in that All-Ireland final as well. But look, we're going to be here to discuss my hurling team of the year. Now, I must stress, it is my hurling team of the year on the channel. You know, don't get offended. I feel like people sometimes get very triggered by team of the years and everything else. So we'll see what happens. It's bound to trigger a few people. But look, it is my opinion. But do let me know in the comments down below. Do feel free to disagree and let me know what players you would have in here as well. Obviously, very difficult as well choosing all-stars because there's so many great players, and there's been a lot of great players this year. And like the face of the all-stars changes so much throughout the year as well. Like you would have expected a team flooded with Cork players, but after what Tipperary done, you know, it's almost flipped it the other way. But look, we're going to get into it and break it down in more detail. And let's start with the goalkeeper. I've gone with Rhys Shelley. Look, there was a few candidates here, to be fair. I mean, Pat Collins was in the mix probably up until the final, but had a poor enough final, it must be said. I think Sean Brennan actually had a very good year for Dublin. But look, this was fairly nailed on for Rhys Shelley, wasn't it? I mean, he had a phenomenal year. Scored a point in the final as well for his troubles. Made some big saves. Didn't concede any goals versus Kilkenny. Made some big saves in that game as well. And interesting, you know, only one goal conceded versus Cork. Look, a lot of that was down to Tipperary's defence, and they were absolutely brilliant. No, I think Rhys Shelley wins goalkeeper of the year in at number one. In at number two, we've gone with Robert Doyle. Look, there were some other players in the mix here. Niall O'Leary could have been in the conversation. I think Conor McHugh had a fantastic year for Dublin as well. But look, Robert Doyle, what a season. I mean, that clearance alone versus Kilkenny at the end. And to think, like, with the confusion around the score and everything else, if that goes in the back of the net, you know, maybe we're not sat here now talking about Tipperary. Maybe we're talking about Kilkenny, or maybe Cork would have won yesterday. We actually don't know, you know, and credit has to go down to Robert Doyle for that block. And a phenomenal season from Robert Doyle. Brilliant defender. You know, you saw some of the work around that he did on the final as well, some of the blocks and challenges, you know, putting his body on the line time and time again. So yeah, Robert Doyle in at right cornerback. In a fullback, we've gone with Hugh Lawler. Look, there is another fullback in Owen Connolly, who I must admit does get on this team before people start, you know, throwing things at the TV or the phone or whatever they're watching this on. Look, Hugh Lawler was phenomenal, lads. I mean, them catches he made versus Galway in the Leinster final were nothing short of remarkable. And like, Hugh Lawler is such a warrior, isn't he? Like, he's such a battler, you know, able to chip away with a couple of points as well for his troubles. Phenomenal hurler. He would have been in the conversation for hurler of the year, in my opinion, if Kilkenny had have gotten to the final. Yes, Kilkenny conceded 4 goals versus Tip, and you know, maybe a bit of, you know, Hugh Lawler lacked a bit of pace in certain aspects of that, but I don't think it was down to him, to be honest with you. And I do think if Kilkenny, you know, if the rest of the Kilkenny defence had done as well as him, I think Hugh Lawler is in the conversation for hurler of the year, and I think Kilkenny possibly could have even won an All-Ireland. So yeah, Hugh Lawler in a fullback. Left cornerback was a difficult one. I've gone with Sean O'Donoghue. I've, you know, tipped and toed around this one a little bit. I do really like Mike Breen. I thought he had a phenomenal year for Tipperary, and he was solid as well in that final, it must be said. Like a lot of Tipperary's defence, you know, full back line, half back line. And look, Sean O'Donoghue, like, you know, it's a weird one after that game and after watching, like, no Cork player played well in that second half. So I think you should kind of like not discount the second half in total when you're looking at these all-stars. But, you know, we shouldn't read too much into that, because I think overall Cork still did have a phenomenal year in terms of how their players performed this year. And Sean O'Donoghue was definitely one of those players as well. Absolutely brilliant. A real physical presence in that full-back line as well. And even as well, to be fair, on that first half, like when Tipperary were floating balls in, they were floating balls in on top of Owen Downey in that first half, and he was struggling. But when they went up to Sean O'Donoghue's side, Sean O'Donoghue was winning them battles, to be fair. So Yeah, Sean O'Donoghue in at left cornerback. Moving into the halfback line, and in at number 5, this is probably going to be a bit of a surprise, but I've gone with Conor Burke of Dublin. Maybe this is a bit of a personal choice. I am a Dublin fan. I wanted to get a Dublin player in here somewhere. Look, I do think Conor Burke deserves to get in here. Like, he's had a phenomenal year for Dublin. He scored 5 points versus Limerick in that win, 3 points versus Cork. Very solid throughout the Leinster campaign as well. And defensively, very solid. Tracking back, being an extra man in terms of attack as well. There were some other players in the mix here. Kieran Joyce was one I was looking towards. Cole Hayes, I think, definitely deserves a mention as well. I do think Conor Burke was better. I think Kieran Joyce was probably better as well. But yeah, go with Conor Burke at 5. In at 6, it's Ronan Maher. This is a no-brainer. Don't really need to explain this. Phenomenal performance in the final. He's in the conversation for Hurler of the Year. We are going to speak about who I think is going to be Hurler of the Year and Young Hurler of the Year in this video as well. And Ronan Maher, I mean, lads, absolute warrior as well. Talk about Hugh Lawler being a warrior. Like, watching Ronan Maher and watching that game, it was like he was playing halfback. You know, it was like he was playing centre back and fullback. Do you know what I mean? And then he was at wing back at times. He was absolutely everywhere, wasn't he, Ronan Maher? An absolute engine. Didn't seem to tire. The legs on him as well. In terms of the ground that he can cover for this Tipperary side. Absolutely phenomenal from Ronan Maher. He's in at 6. And then at 7, I did put Owen Connolly here. Look, as I said, Owen Connolly, I mean, probably one of the highest scoring fullbacks I can remember for some time. And look, we have put him in a wing back. He has played here before. He has played at centre back as well. I'm pretty sure he's played up up near the forwards at different stages as well throughout his time as a young hurler. So I've put him in this team. There's no way he could miss out, in my opinion. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Look, Brian O'Mara was the other player who was in the conversation here. Maybe Mark Coleman as well could get in the mix. But no, I think Owen Connolly, we have to get him in this team, lads. Then we move into midfield, and this was a difficult one. So we're going to go with my 2 midfield options first of all. I've gone with Dara Fitzgibbon, and I've actually gone with Adam English as well, which might surprise a couple of people. Looking at Dara Fitzgibbon, first of all, look, I think Dara Fitzgibbon had a phenomenal year for Cork. He definitely deserves a place in the midfield. This was the one that was nailed on. I think the next midfield choice, there was definitely a couple of options and a few players, and including Tim O'Mahony as well. But look, in terms of Dara Fitzgibbon, look, he scored 2 points versus Tipperary. Like a lot of the other players, probably struggled in the second half, and his big performance came in the first half. 3 points versus Dublin, 4 versus Limerick, a goal and 2 versus Waterford as well. 3 points versus Clare back in the start of the Munster Championship, which I think was probably his best performance. So Dara Fitzgibbon in there, the hooks, the challenges that he was getting at different stages as well, I think deserves a strong mention there. And the other player I've gone with is Adam English. And look, I think Adam English has had a very underrated year. Like, when you look back at some of the tallies and scores that he's put up, he scored 1-2 versus Tipperary on the open weekend. He scored 1-3 versus Cork in that win in the Munster round robin. He scored 5 points in the defeat versus Dublin. Like, he's been phenomenal this year for Limerick, and he's not getting the credit he deserves. I think because Limerick lost to Dublin, a lot of people are just instantly looking at Limerick players and say, oh, we can't choose anyone for Limerick, because for them to have been knocked out in the quarterfinals and everything else. But you have to look at things objectively, and I think Adam English was phenomenal this year for Limerick, in my opinion. Look, in terms of other midfielders who were in the mix, we mentioned Tim O'Mahony, who was very, very close to getting in here. Willie Connors was definitely in the mix as well. And I actually think Jordan Malloy, a bit of an outside shout, had a very strong season for Kilkenny. He scored 4 points in the All-Ireland semi-final versus Tipperary, and I actually thought he played very well. And he's definitely a player to keep an eye on over the next couple of years, in my opinion. But we're going to go with a midfield pairing of Dara Fitzgibbon and Adam English. Moving into the half-forward line then, and we do have Cathal Mannion in at 10. And lads, Cathal Mannion, what a season he had. 267 he scored across 6 games in the Championship, 121 of which was from play. Look, Galway had a very, very poor year. They lost in the quarterfinals themselves to Tipperary. Very underwhelming as well, it must be said, in Leinster, like losing the final. Like, a slight bit of improvement from O'Donoghue's men, but still a lot of work that needs to be done, it must be said. But Cathal Mannion was absolutely phenomenal. His shoulders must be sore from carrying this Galway team. He was that good. And yeah, like, this was another one that, for a team that lost in a quarterfinal, like, this is an absolute no-brainer, in my opinion. And again, if Galway had progressed a little bit further, I think you would have been talking about Cathal Mannion as hurler of the year. Like, he was that good. So yeah, Cathal Mannion in a 10. In at 11, and I know I said I wasn't going to put him in here originally, but I put Keane O'Sullivan in. Look, originally I did put Shane Barrett in there. Look, Shane Barrett, I thought was very good in the final versus Tipperary. He scored 1-4 in that first half. Like everyone else, went missing in the second, but still had a very, very good performance and got that goal. And look, Barrett has kind of drifted in and out of games at times. He's had good patches in games, and then he's dropped out. And I was going to put him in here originally, but look, I've gone back and looked at it. And Keane O'Sullivan, lads, he scored 522 from play. And when I seen that statistic, I was like, you know what? We've got to just put him in the side. I don't think that there can be any debate about that. To score 522 from play, playing for Dublin as well, you know, where you're not going to get the same type of ball that a lot of other forwards get. So, yeah, I'm putting Keane O'Sullivan in at 11. In at 12, it's Jake Morris. Contenders in here. I think Sean Curry was absolutely phenomenal for Dublin this year. You could maybe look at Aaron Gillan. Could you throw a Jason Ford in here? But no, I think Jake Morris had a phenomenal season for Tipperary. It was interesting. Like in the final, I actually don't think he had his best game. He missed a couple of chances in the first half and, you know, wasn't quite at the pace of the game. But in the second half, he scored some brilliant points. And overall, he's been phenomenal for Tipperary this year. It's worth mentioning as well, he's played in a different position, like playing in the half-forward line as opposed to, you know, in a corner forward or full forward where he's, you know, especially a corner forward, really, which is where we would most see him. But looking through it, like 3 points in the final versus Cork. He scored 4 points versus Kilkenny, 5 versus Galway as well. So in terms of scoring, look, not as much, but again, you probably expect that, not on frees as well, but definitely deserve it of getting in there, in my opinion. As I said, Sean Curry, not too far away, definitely in the conversation, in my opinion. Jason Ford as well, you were looking at maybe an Andy Ormond, who we haven't mentioned yet as well, scored 215 from play. Billy Ryan had a fantastic season for Kilkenny as well, it must be said. He scored 215. But the man I have gone for in the end. Then we move into the full forward line, and in a 13, we do have Brian Hayes. Look, Brian Hayes was the favourite for Hurler of the Year before the All-Ireland final. It's fair to say that Ronan Marr did a colossal job on Brian Hayes in that final. But yeah, look, I think Brian Hayes overall has still had a phenomenal year. 5'9" is what he ends up with for playing in at corner forward. And yeah, look, you know, again, there were some other potential players in here. Like Darren McCarthy was one that originally I did put him in this team. I had him in the team, but then I was kind of thinking, do you know what? When you're kind of comparing it up with different players, like Darren McCarthy in the final was outrageous. Man of the match, scored 113, and that has to stand for something. But he was sent off twice, which, you know, it has to count for something, really, doesn't it? So let me know, like, do you still put Darren McCarthy in there? I'll be curious to know for what other supporters think, but I am going to put Brian Hayes in there. I think as well for the two other players that I'm going to discuss next, I don't think you could drop them. I think not to have Brian Hayes in the team as well, like, would be a bit of an insult. So yeah, Brian Hayes at 13. In a full forward, we have John McGrath, and lads, John McGrath had an absolute GOAT season, in my opinion. He scored 716, all of which from play. I mean, like, looking through the tally that John McGrath put up in a lot of these games as well. Like, he scored 2-2 in the final versus Cork. He scored 1-2 versus Kilkenny. Going back, he scored 2-3 versus Clare earlier in the year. He scored 2-1 versus Limerick as well. Like, this man has been bagging goals left, right, and centre. And this has been a phenomenal season by John McGrath. And I have to say it now, Hurler of the Year, in my opinion. Look, it's between him and Ronan Marr, but John McGrath has just been phenomenal. Like, positionally as well, floating balls on top of the square, getting on the end of things, getting big goals and big moments when his county needs them the most as well. He's been absolutely phenomenal. And what a performance from John McGrath in the final as well. Wins the penalty, you know, gets a big goal versus Kilkenny. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer, in my opinion. Look, I think Ronan Marr is in the conversation in terms of Hurler of the Year. Owen Connolly probably isn't a million miles away, but for me, it's John McGrath all day long. And last but not least, we have Mossy Keown in at 15. Look, Martin Keown scored 615 for Kilkenny from play this year across 7 games. By far, Kilkenny's best hurler this season, without question. Really, really stood up. And it's been an unusual year for Kilkenny, where again they've sort of fallen short at the same kind of hurdle as it's been for the last couple of years. Owen Cody's been in now through injury. We haven't seen the best of Adrian Mullen. Billy Ryan's obviously stood up. TJ Reid has always been there, and to be fair, had a very good semi-final, it must be said. But yeah, Martin Keown's been absolutely brilliant. His stick work, the skill as well, has been absolutely brilliant. And yeah, Martin Keown for me. Any other forwards like I'm potentially missing, like maybe Sam O'Farrell, who I didn't mention earlier. Stephen Bennett had a very good season for Waterford, scored 433. Lee Chin actually as well has to get a good shout out, 356 for Wexford this year, which is phenomenal in its own right. But look, Wexford didn't get out of Leinster, so I think it's very, very hard to justify giving an all-star to Lee Chin. But do let me know in the comments down below in terms of any players I've missed. Look, we'll throw the team up on the screen again. Number 1, we've Rhys Shelley. 2 is Robert Doyle. 3 is Hugh Lawler. 4 is Sean O'Donoghue. 5 is Conor Burke. 6 is Ronan Marr. 7 is Owen Connolly. 8 is Dara Fitzgibbon. 9 is Adam English. 10 is Cathal Mannion. 11 is Keane O'Sullivan. 12 is Jake Morris. 13 is Brian Hayes. 14 is John McGrath. And 15 is Martin Keown. Do let me know your team of the year in the comments down below. And until the next one, we'll see you all later.